I'm Caroline Blake, 34 years old, and the only thing more painful than sitting alone at my father's retirement banquet was hearing him praise everyone but me. I watched from the far end of the ballroom as my brother stood by his side, basking in his approval. "I owe everything to my sons," he said into the microphone, not even glancing in my direction. Around me, 200 people clapped like it was nothing. But something in me shifted. I stood up holding a small silver box I'd wrapped just for him, my last gift. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and tap that like and subscribe button if you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have believed in you. Growing up being the only daughter of Richard Blake meant I learned early on how to go unnoticed in plain sight. At home, the business talk started when I was still playing with dolls. And by the time I was 8, I'd already figured out that what I said didn't count. One Sunday dinner, my dad was going over some sales numbers with my older brothers Daniel and Mark. I'd overheard the term inventory turnover and asked about it. Curious, excited to be part of the conversation. My father didn't even blink. "Why don't you go help your mother in the kitchen?" "Caroline, this is business talk," he said. I remember how everyone chuckled and how my face burned as I pushed my chair back without a word. That was the first time. But it sure wasn't the last. My dad came from almost nothing. Grew up in Toledo, worked his way through college washing dishes at night. He started Blake Manufacturing with a $7,000 loan from his uncle and turned it into a regional giant before his 40th birthday. People looked up to him. He was the kind of man they quoted at conferences, always talking about grit legacy and how a man builds his name through sweat and sacrifice. That was his mantra. A man builds, a man provides, a man leads. My mom, Claire, was different. She was softer, a high school English teacher who gave up her job when Daniel was born. She used to sit with me at the kitchen table, helping me sketch little houses and parks out of scrap paper and crayons. "Your father builds things that work," she used to say gently. "But you, Caroline, you build things that move people." She passed when I was 16. Breast cancer. I still remember how cold the house felt after she was gone. At the funeral, I overheard my father talking to my uncle. He didn't know I was close enough to hear. "At least the boys will carry the business forward," he said. "That's what matters." I stood frozen behind the coat rack, my black shoes soaking in the slush by the door. All through school, I outpaced my brother's grades, awards, everything. I graduated valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to Cornell for architecture. Daniel and Mark barely scraped by at the state college on my father's dime, but it never mattered. My acceptance letter came, and I held it out like maybe this time he'd be proud. He looked at it and handed it back without even reading the first line. "Architecture," he said. "That's not a real career, Caroline. It's just expensive art." There were 3 moments that stuck with me the most. The first was when I was 12, and I won a statewide award for a science fair project on eco-friendly construction. My mom came proud as anything. My dad skipped it, said he had to catch Daniel's JV basketball game. Daniel didn't even play that night. The second came after my mom's funeral. That line, he said, about the boys being the legacy. And the third? That was my graduation from Cornell. I was chosen to give the keynote speech for the School of Architecture. My father arrived late, missed the entire thing. Left immediately after photos, checking his watch every 2 minutes. "The boys have a lunch with an investor," he said, brushing off my aunt's request for one more family picture. That lunch turned out to be a quick bite with a vendor Blake Manufacturing already worked with. Still, my brothers weren't cruel. Not exactly. Daniel would sometimes look at me like he wanted to say something but never did. Mark once gave me an awkward half hug after our dad brushed off my promotion to senior designer. "You know how he is," he mumbled. After graduation, I turned down the obligatory job offer at Blake Manufacturing. I accepted an entry-level design position at Foster & Doyle, an architecture firm focused on sustainable city planning. My father didn't even pretend to hide his opinion. "You'll be back within the year," he said, asking for a real job. 8 years later, I became the youngest partner in the firm's history. My design for the Riverbend project, an entire residential district built around renewable systems, won the National Design Award. Architectural Digest ran a 3-page profile on my work. I made more than my brothers combined. Not that I ever said so. Every time something good happened, my dad responded the same way. "Nice press. Probably just lucky timing. Must be a trendy niche. Not real business, though." Eventually, I stopped sharing anything. We saw each other on Christmas, sometimes at weddings. That was it. And then one morning over coffee, I opened a cream-colored envelope that announced Richard Blake's retirement party. Black tie optional, downtown Chicago, 3 weeks away. I set it down on the table and stared out at the lake. My boyfriend Drew looked across his mug and asked, "You gonna go?" "I guess I should," I said. But I already felt the knot forming in my chest. I thought maybe this time would be different. Maybe at the end of his career with his legacy, secure my father might finally see me for who I really was. Drew offered to come along, but I told him no. "It's something I need to face by myself," I said. He didn't press. That night I sat in my office flipping through a portfolio of my work. The Riverbend project, the Midtown Library design, the school rebuild in Denver. All of it built without a single dollar from my family. On the coffee table, the silver-wrapped box sat quietly in its tote bag. I thought about leaving it behind. But then I remembered something my mom used to say when she'd see me hesitate. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is tell the truth. So I took it with me. The ballroom at the Grand Lexington was as extravagant as I expected. White linens, crystal chandeliers, floral centerpieces in Blake Company's signature navy and silver. A giant banner draped across the back wall, celebrating Richard Blake, 40 years of leadership. I slipped in just after the cocktail hour started. Nobody noticed at first. My father's cousin greeted me near the bar, drink in hand. "Still doing that architecture thing, Caroline?" he asked, like I hadn't been published in every design journal in the country. That was the tone of the night. Old board members, former colleagues, even his golf buddies, they all seemed surprised I still had a career. Daniel spotted me from across the room, standing with his wife Nicole and Mark with his wife Allison. Our greetings were stiff but polite. Daniel leaned in. "Dad's over there with some Japanese investors," he said, motioning toward a corner near the stage. "Might want to say hi before things get started." I walked over. My father saw me approaching and stepped away from the group with a practiced half-smile. "Caroline," he said, offering a brief hug that barely brushed my shoulder. "You made it." His eyes ran over my outfit, a navy suit with crisp lines and architectural detail. Finally dressing like a professional, he added as if that counted as praise. "Congratulations on your retirement," I said. "We'll talk later," he replied, already turning to greet someone else. I found my seat at table 19 near the back, next to distant cousins and 2 mid-level managers. The tote bag with the box rested against my chair. Dinner was served, but I barely touched it. My throat was tight. I watched as my father laughed with his board members, toasted with champagne, held court like he always did. Then the lights dimmed, and a screen lowered for the tribute video. It began with footage from the early days, my father breaking ground on his first warehouse, shaking hands with city officials standing next to governors. Applause scattered through the room. Then came clips of him coaching Daniel's Little League team, helping Mark move into his college dorm, cutting ribbons at new factory sites with his sons at his side. There was only one photo of me, a family portrait, when I was around 10, taken before my mom got sick. That was it. No mention of my degree, no mention of my firm. Nothing about the Riverbend project or the national award. It was like I disappeared after middle school. After the video, several of his colleagues spoke about his leadership, his brilliance, his devotion to family. One even said, "He's built his company the same way he's raised his children, solid, loyal, prepared." Then glanced toward my brothers. Daniel and Mark gave a joint speech next full of stories about their father's mentorship. "Everything we know about business we learned from him," Daniel said. "His legacy lives on through us," Mark added. Then the room filled with applause again as Richard Blake stepped to the podium. He straightened his tie, scanned the audience, and began. 40 years, he said. 40 years of building something from nothing. He talked about growth, about strategy, about perseverance. Then his voice shifted a touch more personal. "People ask me what I'm proudest of. That's easy. I'm proud of my sons, Daniel and Mark." The room clapped again as he gestured toward them. "They've shown they understand leadership, responsibility, sacrifice." He paused. Then his gaze found mine. "Unlike my daughter," he said. "She chose another path. I used to worry about Caroline, but not anymore. I've accepted that she just doesn't have what it takes for real business." There were a few uncomfortable chuckles. Someone nearby shifted in their seat. I kept my eyes on him, refusing to look away. He went on praising my brother's role in expanding into Europe, talking about their leadership during economic downturns. Not one more word about me. When he finished, the room rose to its feet. Applause thundered through the ballroom. I didn't move. My hand had already slipped into the tote bag. I took the silver box out and placed it on the table. Then I stood. The sound of my heels against the floor cut through the noise. The applause started to fade as heads turned. I walked toward the stage, my posture steady, my grip firm. My father saw me coming. His expression flickered from surprise to annoyance. Daniel half rose from his seat. Mark reached across and gently pushed him back down. I climbed the short steps to the stage, stopped just beside my father, and held the box out between us. "Congratulations, Dad," I said, my voice clear. "I brought you something." He didn't take it. "Caroline." "This isn't the time," he said more sternly. "I think it is," I replied. "It's from your biggest failure." And I placed it in his hands. Then I turned, walked back down the steps, and didn't look back. No one spoke. I passed the head table. Daniel looked down at his napkin. Mark looked straight ahead. I walked through the double doors out into the quiet of the hotel lobby, then through the glass entrance and down into the parking garage. Only when I sat behind the wheel did I realize my hands were shaking. My breath came in short bursts. The tears came fast. Years of swallowing words, of shrinking myself to fit into his narrow world, had led to that moment. And now that it had passed, I didn't know what to feel. I drove 3 blocks before I had to pull over. My phone started buzzing. "Daniel." "What did you give him?" "Are you okay, Mark? He looks like he's seen a ghost. Call me." I turned the phone over and let it fall into the passenger seat. By the time I reached home, Drew was already there. He opened the door and didn't say a word, just pulled me into his arms. It was everything I whispered. My diplomas, my awards, press about my projects, a letter from Mom, a video of my work, everything he's refused to see. He didn't say much, just held me until the shaking stopped. In a different room across that ballroom, my father stood frozen at the podium, the microphone still on. He looked down at the silver box. Slowly he began to open it. And that is where everything started to change. At the front of the ballroom, my father stood still, one hand resting on the box I'd placed in his arms moments earlier. The applause had long since faded. The room had settled into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the clink of glassware and the soft murmur of the band easing into a new song. Guests returned to their tables, some exchanging glances, others avoiding them altogether. I wasn't there to see what happened next, but I heard about it later from Mark first, then from others. He didn't speak right away, just sat down, slowly opened the box, and began to take out its contents, one by one. The first thing he pulled out was my diploma. My name printed in bold honors, noted in fine lettering. He set it gently on the table. Next came my license, then the Hammond medal. He held that a little longer, turning it over in his hand. The USB followed, labeled in small writing, "What it takes," and finally an envelope, yellowed slightly with time. My name written across the front in my mother's handwriting. He paused when he saw it. Mark said it looked like he'd stopped breathing. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he looked at the contents, again my press clippings, the photos of finished buildings, statements showing the firm's success. All of it laid out in front of him like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't realized was missing. Eventually, he opened the envelope. He read my mother's letter quietly, his hands trembling just slightly. Then he folded it closed and sat back in his chair. It was James who stepped in to wrap up the evening, took the microphone and thanked the guests for coming, told them the bar was open. My father didn't return to the podium. The next morning I woke up to 7 missed calls, all from my father. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I spent the next few days keeping to myself, went back to the office, threw myself into the Riverside redesign. My coworkers didn't ask questions, though I could feel them looking. By the end of the week, Sophia stopped by. We had lunch at our usual cafe on Michigan Avenue. She didn't bring it up until we were halfway through our plates. So she said, "Are you going to call him back?" "I'm not sure," I said, pushing some lettuce around with my fork. "I'm just not ready to hear his voice." She didn't push. Later that afternoon, James showed up at my office. He didn't look like himself. His tie was off. His shirt was wrinkled. His hair was out of place. "Can I come in?" he asked from the doorway. I nodded. He sat down across from me, leaning forward. "Dad hasn't been back to the office," he said. "Canceled his golf trip. Not returning calls. People are starting to notice." I looked at him, waiting. "He watched your video," James continued. "All of it. He made us watch it too." The next morning, I sat back in my chair. "I had no idea," he said. "I didn't know you'd done all that." "You never asked," I said. "No, I didn't." He didn't look defensive, just tired. "I was too comfortable," he said, "being the favorite." Neither of us said anything for a moment. "He wants to talk to you," James said, "but he's not pushing. Said he'd wait until you're ready." I didn't answer. After he left, I opened my email. There was a message from my father, sent at 2:13 a.m. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." The body was just 2 sentences. I saw everything on the USB. I was wrong. "Can we talk when you're ready?" I didn't reply. Instead, I booked a flight to Singapore. A new client was requesting consulting on a green redevelopment. It was a clean reason to leave for a while. 3 days into the trip, I got an alert on my phone from an architecture news outlet. Blake Manufacturing announces new green design division. The article said Richard Blake had postponed his retirement. He was launching a sustainability initiative, solar retrofitting green manufacturing upgrades, even a new community outreach program. Not long after my phone rang, it was Mark. "You saw the release?" he asked. I did. He's been researching nonstop, hired consultants. He's talking about carbon-neutral logistics now. It's different. I didn't say much. "He keeps quoting your video," Mark said. "That line about how construction causes 40% of global emissions, he's used it in 3 meetings. We ended the call soon after. When I returned home, there was a package waiting outside my apartment door. It was from my father. I left it sitting in the hallway for 2 days. Then finally I brought it in and opened it. Inside was a roll of blueprints wrapped with a plain black ribbon. I unrolled them across the table. They were rough but detailed. A community center, education rooms, garden space, a performance area. Notes filled the margins in his handwriting. Questions about sustainable materials. daylighting systems, cost analyses. There was a letter tucked inside the plans, written on his stationery. It began with my name. He said the box I gave him had been a reckoning, that he had failed me by judging by assuming, that my mother had seen what he refused to. He wrote about the project, a center in Franklin, her hometown. Said she'd once dreamed of giving back. He never followed through. Now he wanted to, and he wanted my opinion on the plans. Maybe even my help, only if I chose. No pressure. I read it 3 times. Then I sent a message. Coffee, Lakefront Cafe, Wednesday, 10 a.m. His response came within a minute, I'll be there. The Lakefront Cafe was quiet that morning, just the hum of espresso machines and soft clinks of dishes behind the counter. I chose a table near the window facing out toward Lake Michigan. The breeze off the water stirred the branches outside, and the late morning light fell across the empty seat across from me. He arrived right on time. Same suit as always, pressed conservative. But something about him had changed. His shoulders were rounded just slightly. His walk was slower. Caroline, he said, stopping beside the table. I nodded toward the chair. Coffee black, he said, settling in. The server came and went. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that doesn't have a clear beginning or end. The community center, I said. It's an interesting idea. He let out a breath. It needs work. I waited. I've been reading, he continued, trying to understand the basics. Materials, layouts, passive energy flow. I'm out of my depth. Why Franklin? I asked. He looked out at the lake. That was your mother's dream. She wanted to give back. Always said that town shaped her. There was another pause. She wanted to start a scholarship fund, he said. I said we'd do it after things settled down. Then she got sick. The breeze moved through the open window nearby. I watched your video, he said. The one on the USB. All of it, 17 times. He gave a slight smile, almost sheepish. I counted. I didn't speak. I've been wrong, Caroline, he said, about more than I can explain. I thought building meant factories and bottom lines, but what you've done, what you've designed, he stopped. The Riverbend project, he said finally. It changed everything in that neighborhood, the housing, the park, the job training facility. That's legacy. That's real. The sincerity in his voice surprised me. What changed, I asked. He took his time. Your note, he said. The one in the box. You wrote that you build with vision and heart. It reminded me of something your mother once said. His gaze dropped to the table. You were 9, he said. You'd built some model out of cereal boxes and string, showed it to me. I told you to put it away, that I was working. He looked up again. She told me later that night, you're so focused on your empire, Richard. You can't see she's building a better world. The server returned with our drinks. Neither of us reached for them. She made me promise something before she passed, he said. She made me promise to support your dreams, whatever they were. He paused. I failed at that. I looked down. Did you know, he said quietly, she confronted me about the way I treated you? I shook my head. More than once, he said. She said I was teaching you to expect less just because you were a girl. She said I was creating a story you'd have to live down. He stirred his coffee, though he didn't add anything. She was wrong about one thing he said. You didn't accept it. You kept going despite me. He sat back. I've spent so long believing success looked one way, he said, but it doesn't. Not really. And I see that now. Neither of us spoke for a moment. I spent years trying to make you see me, I said. Each project, each award, I kept thinking maybe this one would be enough. He nodded. I know that now, he said. James and Mark have been honest with me. More than I deserve. We've started family therapy. That caught me off guard. Twice a week, he said. Small steps. He glanced up. "I'm not asking for anything," he added. "Not today, not in any way that puts pressure on you. I wanted to hear what you thought about the project, and if it's something you'd even consider helping with." He reached into his folder and pulled out a revised print of the blueprint. "No strings attached," he said. "Your terms, your design." I unfolded it. The structure had potential. Layout was sound. There were issues with materials and orientation, but those were fixable. "I'll review it," I said. "Professionally. That's all I can offer right now." "That's more than I deserve," he said. We finished our drinks mostly in silence, but the tension had lifted slightly, enough for both of us to exhale. He stood to leave, pausing beside the table. "Your brothers, they'd like to see you too." "One step at a time," I said. He nodded. Later that week, I sent him a marked-up version of the plans. He responded with questions thoughtful and clear. He'd done the reading. We met again, then again. Eventually, we started working through the design side by side. I redrew large portions of the layout, made room for flexible spaces, added community classrooms, restructured the lighting to rely on passive solar. He listened, took notes, didn't interrupt. 6 weeks passed like that. And then one afternoon I received an invitation to dinner. Mark's place. James would be there too. I thought about saying no, but I didn't. Mark's house sat at the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac just outside Evanston, surrounded by maple trees that were starting to turn with the season. The driveway was full when I pulled up James's SUV already there. My father's sedan parked at the curb. I sat for a moment watching the porch light flicker on with the motion sensor. My hands rested on the steering wheel. Then I reached for the bottle of wine I'd brought and walked up the steps. Allison answered the door. Her smile was warm but hesitant. "We're in the kitchen," she said, stepping aside. "Mark's making that ridiculous pasta he's been obsessed with." The scent of garlic and tomatoes filled the house. I followed her in and spotted James leaning against the island, a glass in hand. My father was seated at the end of the table, flipping through a folder that looked suspiciously like site schematics. Mark turned from the stove. "Hey," he said, "you made it." I nodded. Traffic was light. Dinner came together quickly after that. We moved into the dining room. Bowls of food were passed around, napkins laid across laps. It was the first meal we'd all shared in years without it being a wedding or a funeral. The conversation stayed on safe ground. At first, weatherwork a few awkward jokes about James's golf game. But about halfway through the meal, Rebecca, Mark's wife, turned to me. "So, Caroline, what are you working on now?" "Anything outside the community center." Before I could answer, my father set down his fork. "She's leading the design," he said. "Completely restructured the layout last week. The solar integration alone will reduce the long-term operating budget by almost a third." James looked up, blinking. "Wait, 30%? I nodded. "With the new array and some light-well adjustments, yes. We're still modeling final performance, but the estimate's holding." James let out a low whistle. "That's impressive." She also added multi-purpose classrooms and an adaptive use gallery, my father added, things I wouldn't have thought of in 100 years. The table went quiet for a moment. Then Mark spoke up. "He's been going to night classes." James laughed. "He's serious. Took over the basement guest room and filled it with books." My father cleared his throat. "I want to understand what I'm building. I didn't before." There wasn't anything performative in his tone, just a matter-of-fact explanation. As dinner wound down, the atmosphere shifted. The years of built-in roles, the youngest, the overlooked, the one who left, all seemed a little less rigid. At one point, my father asked about my project in Tokyo. I told him about the challenges of designing around cultural heritage restrictions and how we'd integrated reclaimed materials into the foundation. He didn't just nod. He asked follow-up questions, took notes, listened. When the conversation drifted toward company news, something unexpected happened. "We've been talking," James said, "about expanding the sustainability focus company-wide. It's long overdue." My father looked toward me. "We've been too insulated in our thinking, too slow to adapt." No one argued. The meal ended with coffee and a simple peach cobbler. We sat around a little longer before I finally gathered my things. As I walked to the door, my father caught up with me. "Caroline," he said, "thank you for showing up tonight and for sticking with the project." I nodded. "See you Tuesday. We have that walkthrough scheduled. I'll be there." The next 6 months moved faster than I expected. The community center plans were finalized, permits cleared, and bids accepted. Groundbreaking was set for early spring. When the day arrived, I stood in the middle of the cleared lot in Franklin, surrounded by local officials, city staff, and a small group of press. A row of ceremonial shovels had been set up under a white tent. My father came up beside me just before the speeches began. "You should speak," he said. "Not me." I looked out at the small crowd, the banner with my mother's name strung up behind the podium. "All right," I said. "I will." When it was my turn, I stepped forward and took a breath. "This center is more than a building," I began. "It's about the foundations that hold us together, both the ones we pour with concrete and the ones we carry from the families who raised us." I spoke about my mother, about how she believed in community and education, about her dream to give something back to the town that shaped her. I talked about sustainable design, about what it means to create something lasting and thoughtful, something that makes space for everyone. "Every building tells a story," I said, glancing toward the sky. "This one will tell a story about change, about second chances, and about what can happen when we choose to see each other differently." Applause came in slowly at first, then grew stronger. As I stepped down, my father caught my eye. He didn't say anything, but the expression on his face said enough. That night, as the event wound down, he approached with a small package wrapped in plain paper. "I found this while cleaning out the garage," he said. Inside was a cardboard model I'd built as a child, tiny solar panels made from foil, a rooftop garden drawn in crayon. "Your mother kept it," he said it was ahead of its time. I ran a finger along one edge, the glue still holding after all these years. "Thank you," I said. "No," he replied quietly. "Thank you for not walking away. From the work, from yourself, even from me." We stood there together, watching the last of the equipment being packed away. The ceremonial shovels were packed away, the chairs folded, and the banner bearing my mother's name gently taken down by a volunteer crew from the local high school. The sun had dropped low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the empty lot that would soon hold the Margaret Blake Community Center. I stayed behind a little longer than the rest, walking the outline we'd marked for the entrance. My father lingered too, hands in his pockets, watching quietly as the last truck rolled away. We didn't say much on the drive back to Chicago. He offered to take the wheel, and I let him. The car was silent except for the low sound of talk radio and the occasional rhythm of tires meeting the seams in the road. The next few weeks were full. The center moved into full construction. We met regularly, sometimes on site, sometimes over video. I kept the project on a firm schedule, and he handled funding and public partnerships. He deferred to me every step of the way without needing reminders. At the office, I updated the team weekly. At home, Drew asked questions over dinner, curious about the acoustic design and the new kitchen garden I'd added to the plans. It all started to feel steady. And then one afternoon, I stopped by Blake Manufacturing's main office to pick up some contracts. The receptionist waved me in. "You can go on back. They're in the boardroom." I stepped into the hallway just as my father's voice carried through the open door. "I don't want the new satellite plant following the old model," he said. "Bring in the consultants Caroline worked with on Riverbend. I want her insight from the beginning." The CFO replied something I didn't catch. Then James added, "We've got a tendency to design for output, not for people. She brings both." I waited until the conversation wrapped up before stepping inside. The room quieted when I entered. My father glanced up from a document and offered a small nod. "Thanks for coming by," he said. "We're just finishing." I collected the paperwork, exchanged brief greetings, and turned to leave. But before I reached the door, one of the newer board members, someone I hadn't met before, spoke up. "You're the architect behind the Franklin project, right?" I nodded. "My niece lives 2 blocks from the site," he said. "She says people are already asking about volunteering once it opens. You've built something they're proud of." It was a small comment, but something about it stuck. That evening, Mark called. "You might want to check the company site," he said. Dad made an announcement. I pulled up the press page. The statement was brief. Blake Manufacturing was formally establishing a Green Architecture Advisory Committee. I was listed as its chair. No formal role, no title, but it was there. The next morning I stopped by the office unannounced. My father was at his desk reading something through his glasses. "Is this your way of offering me a job?" I asked, holding up my phone with the article open. He smiled slow and quiet. "No," he said. "It's my way of making sure your voice is part of the future, whether you choose to be or not." I took a seat across from him. "We're about halfway through construction," I said. "If this is about the center—" "It's not," he said. "It's about everything else." There was a pause. "I don't want you to think this is a way to pull you back into something you didn't ask for," he said. "It's just, I've spent most of my career surrounded by people who sound like me, think like me. That worked for a long time, but not anymore." He folded his glasses and set them down. "You see what I can't. You always have." The words were simple, but they landed with weight. Later that week, during a design review, he stepped back from a debate between 2 contractors and asked me directly, "What would you recommend?" Everyone in the room turned to look at me, and I answered not from a place of proving myself, but as a professional among others. Construction reached its midpoint by the end of summer. The framework was up, windows installed, solar panels nearly complete. We hosted a walkthrough for city leaders and local families. Afterward, one of the teachers from the nearby elementary school stopped me in the parking lot. "My students can't wait to use the new space," she said. "We've never had a proper auditorium before." Behind her, my father stood quietly holding a cup of coffee, listening. He didn't interrupt. He just nodded. That evening, as we walked the perimeter of the site before locking up, he paused near the edge of the garden plot. "I want to show you something," he said. We walked to his car and he opened the trunk. Inside was a flat wooden box wrapped in linen. He opened it carefully. Inside was a set of sketches. My mother's. Drawings she'd made years ago, early ideas for a community library, a music room, a mentorship center for girls. The lines were soft, unfinished, notes scrawled in the margins. "She made these before she got sick," he said. "I found them last week tucked behind some books in her office." I ran my fingers along the paper. Some of the ideas mirrored our final plans almost exactly. "She was always thinking ahead," he said. I nodded. He closed the box, gently placed it back in the trunk, and looked at me. "I want this center to reflect her, and you, and everyone else we overlooked along the way." We stood there in silence, the hum of the evening cicadas filling the air around us. For the first time, it felt like we were finally speaking the same language. The opening ceremony drew a larger crowd than we expected. Families gathered along the front steps, some holding homemade signs that said things like, "Welcome to Franklin's future," and "Thank you, Margaret Blake." Children from the local elementary school stood in a neat line along the sidewalk, each holding a small plant for the community garden. I stood off to the side with Drew, watching the final setup come together. Mark and James were helping arrange chairs, directing volunteers, as they carried in folding tables and trays of cookies from a nearby church. The sun was high, the breeze light. A clear day, just warm enough to feel the season changing. A small stage had been set up near the entryway, flanked by banners in navy and soft gray. One read, "Grand Opening, Margaret Blake Community Center." The other, "A Space to Grow, a Place to Belong." My father approached just before the speeches began. He adjusted his tie, looking out over the gathering crowd. "You should speak," he said quietly. "It's your design, your vision. They should hear it from you." I looked at him for a moment. Then I nodded. "All right," I said. "I will." When the mayor wrapped up his opening remarks, he motioned for me to come forward. I stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. "This center was built with more than concrete and beams," I said. "It was built with stories, with memory, with a promise my mother made to her hometown and to herself." I talked about my mother's early life in Franklin, how she had grown up walking these same streets. I shared how she believed in community, not just as an idea, but as a responsibility. How she once told me that buildings can do more than hold people, they can lift them. The spaces we create reflect what we value, I said, and when we value inclusion, learning, creativity, we build spaces like this. I saw my father in the crowd, standing just off to the left, arms loosely folded, his expression unreadable. "This building tells a story," I continued. "It tells the story of transformation, of second chances, and of seeing potential, especially when it's been overlooked." As I stepped back from the microphone, the applause came gently at first, then stronger. People stood. Some clapped quietly, some louder. A few wiped their eyes. I returned to my seat beside my father. He didn't speak at first. Then I heard him say, almost to himself, "She'd be proud of you." Later, during the reception, I walked through the center's main hallway. It still smelled faintly of paint and new carpet. Children ran past in sneakers, their laughter echoing off the walls. In one corner, a group of teens were setting up instruments in the music room. Across the hall, 2 older women flipped through program brochures by the entrance to the art studio. In the library, my father stood near the back wall speaking with Franklin's librarian and the city planner. I stayed near the doorway, just listening. "My daughter taught me what really matters," he said. "This place is her legacy, not mine." He hadn't noticed I was standing there. I stepped outside a few minutes later to get some air. The sun was beginning to shift shadows stretching across the newly planted flower beds. He joined me not long after, holding a small rectangular box wrapped in brown paper. "Something I've been meaning to give you," he said, handing it to me. "Found it a few weeks ago while going through your mother's things." I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was an old model, one I hadn't seen since childhood. Cardboard walls, tiny foil solar panels, crayon-colored windows, and a rooftop garden made from green construction paper. I traced the edges with my fingertip. The corners were worn, but still intact. "She saved it," he said. "Said you had vision from the start." I didn't see it then, but I see it now. We stood together in the quiet for a moment, the noise of the crowd behind us fading into the distance. "No one builds alone," I said softly, still looking at the model. He nodded. "I'm glad you didn't give up," he said. "Not on your work, not on yourself, not even on me." I didn't answer right away, just held the fragile little model in my hands, letting the moment settle. We turned back toward the center, walking side by side, as the last of the guests gathered for the final photo. Inside that building, my work stood in every line and angle, but so did something else, something neither of us had fully expected. We stood just outside the entrance to the community center, watching the last of the guests trickle out their voices, fading into the early evening air. The sky had softened into that golden blue that only seems to happen at the end of something meaningful. The sun dipped low behind the building we'd brought to life, not just through design or funding, but through years of missed moments, hard truths, and slow, sometimes painful change. My father looked out at the garden beds, now lined with small handwritten signs the kids had made during the ribbon cutting: "Hope grows here, Margaret's garden, welcome to your space." "I never imagined this," he said quietly. "Not just the center, but all of it." I didn't say anything right away. The moment didn't need to be filled. We'd come a long way, from silence and distance to this, a project we'd built together. But even more than the building, it was the foundation beneath it that mattered. One laid with honesty and choice, and the kind of recognition that doesn't come with applause, but with time. Later that week, I visited his office for the first time in years, the one he'd held for decades. It looked different now. The corner shelf where old trophies once stood now held design books and models. On the far wall, a framed print of the community center's architectural rendering hung above the sideboard. Next to it, tucked into the corner, sat the little cardboard model I'd made as a child, still crooked, still bright with crayon color. He hadn't repaired the bent edges or replaced the foil. He'd left it just as it was, and somehow that made all the difference. He came in behind me, setting down a folder. "You still designing?" he asked. "Always," I said. He smiled, then pulled out a notepad filled with sketches of a new veterans support wing he'd been brainstorming. "We'll need flexible use space," he said, "and plenty of light." I nodded, already reaching for a pencil. There were still gaps between us, habits that wouldn't change overnight. But the way he asked, the way he waited for my answer, that was new, and it was enough. Looking back, I know the gift I gave him that night at the gala wasn't just a box of documents or a video of my achievements. It was a mirror, one that finally made him see not just me, but himself. And in doing so, we both got the chance to rebuild, not from scratch, but from something deeper, because sometimes justice doesn't arrive like thunder. It arrives quietly, like a door opening, a conversation beginning, a model once ignored placed in plain view. And dignity isn't always loud either. Sometimes it's just choosing to stand up when the moment calls for it and not backing down, even if your voice shakes. If you've ever had to prove your worth to someone who couldn't or wouldn't see it, I hope you know this: your value doesn't disappear just because others don't recognize it. Keep building, with heart, with vision, with quiet strength, and one day someone might finally understand. But even if they don't, you still know who you are. Thank you for being here with me. If this story meant something to you, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need to hear it too. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're always welcome to stay a while.